I'm joined today by Thomas Mueller of the Canada Green Building Council. He's the president and CEO. I've asked Thomas to come and share with us his views on where we're at with green buildings and zero emissions buildings and how it relates to our efforts with Canada's Earth Tower and the City of Vancouver. You've been involved in the campaign for green buildings and for the response to what is now everyone's declaring as a climate emergency. Where do you see us at as it relates to our progress from where you started to where we are today?
That's a really good question, actually, Bruce. I think we made a lot of progress on the green building front. If I kind of backcast, when we started off in around 2000, British Columbia, when it started really here in British Columbia, which was not surprising. And then kind of backcast, we had a pretty really great arc in terms of putting green buildings on the map. So when you look at it, like we have probably about now 1.4 billion square feet of LEED buildings in Canada that either have been certified or getting close to certification. It has changed the conversation in the building industry around what buildings could be, and had a pretty profound impact. If you look at now commercial real estate sector, you don't build any new office building in Canada anymore, and it's at least LEED Gold or LEED Platinum standard. We're seeing some of them now moving into like low carbon, zero carbon options as well. So it really has changed the conversation. Where we haven't had a big impact is in the residential sector. In the residential sector, I mean, we're going through an unprecedented building boom in someone like when you go to Toronto, Vancouver, and those kind of jurisdictions. And on the residential side, we have not seen the same amount of impact and action that we have seen on the commercial and institutional side.
The impact of buildings and the progress as it relates to energy efficiency. What about construction and development? The shift from, principally from concrete to wood. We believe that the future is in using as much mass timber as you can.
Yeah.
How do you see that in terms of the office and residential?
Wood is made by the sun. It sequesters carbon. It's a natural material at the end of life. I think it's a very important part of the conversation, how we get to low carbon buildings. But I think we need to, at the same time, we need to look at, when we choose building materials, what I've learned is, we need to look at all the impacts from these materials. Because some have carbon impacts, some have ecological impacts, some have water impacts. It depends what the material is, where it comes from, how it's produced, how it's transported, how it's manufactured. But wood is definitely one that's really bubbled to the surface because it seems a logical choice when we talk about carbon and carbon sequestration.
How do you see the future as it relates to the use of fossil fuels versus renewables?
Well, I think we need to shift, right? I think actually at the council, we have stopped we're talking less about energy efficiency now. We're talking more about carbon. We're trying to shift the conversation to carbon rather than energy, because it's, as you know, it's not the same. It depends where you are. Here in British Columbia, we have a very clean supply of electricity. It's 95, 94, 96% carbon free. We need to take advantage of that in terms of electrifying buildings. In other jurisdictions, Alberta, you still use coal-fired power plants where electricity has a very high carbon footprint. So we really need to change the conversation, not just talk about energy efficiency to get to our carbon goals. We also need to talk about carbon as the key metric. How do we eliminate carbon from new construction, and how we eliminate carbon from existing buildings as well? That's the challenge at hand. And this elimination of carbon requires us to have first very energy efficient buildings, as highly energy efficient as they can be, and then replace whatever fossil fuels are being used with either electricity from like hydro or from renewable sources. That's really the challenge at hand.
We hear 10 to 15 years, but I've said in an earlier interview that 10 to 15 years keeps sliding out. Now it's like it's been 20 years since we've been talking about it. Where does the Canada Green Building Council's view on the timing for us dealing with the emergency?
Well, we, in terms of the climate emergency, we actually put forward a proposal to the federal government and some of the provincial governments 2-3 years ago already, and we continue to refine that approach. But basically it's a combination of building all larger new buildings over 25,000 square feet to zero carbon performance operations. I think that's very important. And then also retrofitting a significant amount of existing large buildings over 25,000 square feet, both in the residential as well as in the commercial, institutional sector and so on, as well as the industrial sector, to eliminate 20 to 40% of their carbon emissions. That's the challenge leading up to 2030. So if you talk about 2030, we need to build all new large buildings to zero carbon. And then we need to retrofit about 50 to 60,000 large buildings over the next 10 years. Then we achieve a 30% reduction. Then if we don't get to 2030, it's pretty unlikely that you're going to get to 2050. Because we move it always to the right, as miraculously, someone will come in and say, here are your carbon reductions. It's not going to happen, right? So there have to be real reductions in the building sector. And we know now we cannot reach our carbon goals in Canada unless there's significant reductions from the building sector. It's impossible. You can do the math. You need those reductions. If you stay at 2%, which is right now we are on track to 2.4%, the impacts are significant. Falls Creek, the water will go up to Clark Drive if you keep it at 2 degrees. It goes up to Clark Drive. And think about that by 2100. That's what the sea level rise is going to be.
Is the Canada Green Building Council have any platform or views on solar and how it can be used more effectively in buildings? You know, putting photovoltaic on skins like we did with this building here.
In that regard, we're not very prescriptive. Like we don't say, you need to get this from that. What we say is, for example, in a zero carbon standard that you are using on your project, we're basically saying 5%, at least 5% of renewable energy on your site needs to come from on-site sources, right? And then again, you run into things if you have a high-rise project, like a 40-story office building, one being constructed right now in Vancouver, the zero carbon, you don't have enough roof area, so you actually need to look at the building skin and you need to look at building integrated voltaics. I think these standards that we put out, I think they drive innovation in the marketplace, because often we can being chastised and said, how can you set that? It costs us so and so much money and that kind of stuff. But we're trying to force innovation in the marketplace, because building integrated photovoltaics exists for a very long time already, 20 years. It's about commercializing those technologies and bringing down the cost. Just like solar panels have come down quite significantly. Heat pumps are coming down in cost. It all comes down. It's the scale and the application and the costs will come down. And so we don't prescribe one specific technology. We're just setting targets and we leave it up to the ingenuity, the engineers and the architects and the developers to achieve that goal. But the standards are developed with the industry. So we're not developing them in a vacuum. We're actually sitting down with people in government, in the industry, with practitioners that actually are the experts in that field to set the standards and where they could be set. Because if you're too far out, nobody will use it. If you make it too easy, there will be no minimal change on the ground. So you need to strike the right balance. But you need to be rigorous and you need to be demanding.
And determined.
So
you've seen the Canada Earth Tower, you've had a chance to look at it a little. What comments, if any, do you have as you know, either good or bad about what we're trying to do there?
I would say it's an ambitious project that you have. I think if it's being built the way it's being designed, I think you will have one of the top leading projects in Canada, possibly North America. You have a very strong focus on carbon. You choose a building material that sequesters carbon, so it's very beneficial for your carbon budget for the project. It's a local material that you can use. To build the tower, also very important because we need to look over the whole life cycle. But you also incorporated aspects that are really important for the overall well-being of the planet, to water efficiency, health and well-being of the occupants, materials that you use in the building, like low emissions materials. All those kind of things that are really important. But I think what's really ambitious about your project is that it's built with wood, first of all. The second one is that you're trying to achieve zero carbon performance, and you're also trying, through the Passive House standard application, to get the best building envelope you can get in a building of that size and type. Buildings are for people, like to live in there, to learn in there, to work in there, and so I think it's really important that our ambitions around carbon are balanced with the health and well-being of the occupants. I think that's paramount, because people need to love being in those buildings. You need to really enjoy being in those buildings, because we want to have great buildings like that people really love and that people want to use, And they're going to look at your Earth Tower and say, I want to live in a building like that too. We also make sure that the buildings are holistic, that they are resilient, that they are used the lowest amount of water possible, that they have greenery, like vegetation on site, they can absorb carbon, they can absorb stormwater, they can provide fresh air. All the good things, they make a good building, they make a good neighborhood, they make a good community. And I think when you build it, they will come.